Jewel Rogers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. Well, I'm not going to pretend like I'm 27. All right. I'm just going to throw that out there. Because when I got the email asking about this event, they say, tell us about your early career. And I thought to myself, what? When I was 12, 7? What are we saying here? But I'm very honored to be here. This is very exciting for me. I'm going to share some poetry and weave that through the 27 years of story I have so far. All right, and maybe we can check in a couple more decades and I can give you a little update. All right, I got a little more to say. I would like my coffee, but I'll do a short poem because I think my voice can project. I have been sprinting. The proverbial shirt on my back is drenched. The very real lungs in my body are waiting to exhale. I want this. I know it. I do not feel guilty anymore. I just practice. Waiting on nothing long enough to see myself leave. There will be no apologies. This is all that I carry. This weight, this apple seed, this godsend, this holy multiplier. God calls me many things. Tells me to believe. Tells me not to get too wrapped up, but I am surrounded by horizons that can't let go of me shining. And why should I stop now? Who is breaking the rules in this country? Who is breaking the rules in this country and surviving? That is a poem I wrote called Alignment. And that really came recently as I was finishing up my first project. And I had finally gotten to a point where I thought, I pretty much have done all the things that I was thinking about at 12. And now I got to keep kind of going forward. For me, everything started around that age. I was an only child. While I do have brothers and sisters, they live in various areas. My closest sibling is 36. And she lives in Chicago. So I'm an only child. I was the only one in the house. I didn't have to share very much, but I was also very quiet. I did not have a lot of practice using my voice for a very long time, even when I was being trained on how to do it. I was fortunate enough to be involved in the Wesley House. And the Wesley House was a after-school program that my father put me in. And we also had summer programming as well. And they teach you business acumen, talk to you about stocks, teach you how to shake a hand, table etiquette, and they also taught you public speaking. And so, quietly, that was a skill I was building. Around the same time in 6th grade, I got an assignment from a man named Tommy Green, he was my 6th grade teacher, to write a poem. And when it came time to say the poem out loud, more or less was the 12-year-old version of this. And my friend looks next to me, she says, how do you say it like that? And I didn't really have a good answer at the time. I just knew that one, it was happening, and two, I really liked it. Now, at this very same time, I was getting involved in what I like to call the built environment. I went on this family vacation with my father, and the home that we visited was so beautiful, it just moved me to tears at 12. And I thought to myself, wow, I would love to figure out how to make someone feel like this too. And the most that I understood at that time was architecture. I didn't even know what real estate development was until I was in college for architecture. But before that, I had a lot to learn about, and still have a lot to learn, about myself. Of course, one thing I was struggling with was confidence. As an only child, being raised by my father, he's an excellent father, but I did not have the greatest outfits, okay? You could tell, all right? That's all I'm saying, okay? The hairdo was not always the best. And I had an issue with getting bullied, so much so that I started to become a bully. And I didn't seek out anybody to bully, but when it was time to defend myself, I did it very well, almost too well. And so one of the first biggest battles I had was learning how to love myself and be totally fine with all of the things and all of the gifts that I had been given. That came to a head just as I was about to transition from architecture to business at UNL. UNL didn't have a real estate program, but I was fortunate enough to get an architecture internship, and I recognized that's not what I wanted to do. I recognized that as an architect, you create excellent things and you execute on someone else's idea who has the money to fund that. And I wanted to figure out how to fund that. But first I had to get myself together. I want to share this poem with you called Warrior. While I was going to school, I was also starting to get introduced into slam. And so this is a poem that while I was simultaneously going through this struggle and learning how to accept myself, this is a poem that I had written alongside that journey. When my baby speaks of her mother, she will say, Mama was a warrior. Mama swam in the shoes that they gave her, gasping, never drowned. She snatched back air from night terrors wrapped around her throat like secrets only a slave could know a history. Much unlike the fairy tales our children's school books poured down their throats, I still have the marks on my neck to prove the curriculum. The scars of my arms to show that I was never taught to know myself, but I could draw you pictures of a sorrow only your subconscious can understand, and it's funny. Because school was the first place I learned to be afraid to have a baby that looked like it was mine, had skin like it was mine, hair tangled so deep round her spine they wouldn't even have to try to crucify her. She would have done that by age 10 like her mother. Angry she couldn't burn the culture out her skin like them other girls like Daddy. Why my hair can't be straight like them other girls, Daddy? Why I can't be pretty like the other girls? Why when I stay out in the sun too long, I ain't nobody's ray of sunshine? I'm tan lines in really awkward places, like cover that stuff up in public executions of God-given creatures in broad daylight, like bodies of ants that kids burn up on a sidewalk when they finally get their first magnifying glass. So I can tell you how closely you must be to the sound of burning before you are taught to love the smell of your flesh becoming invisible. Ashes amongst concrete and sand, and even then, when you are closest to the shore you have ever been, they will not build castles of you. They will litter you incomplete, call you mother to an undeserving shore. This is not just the story of some black woman. Believe me, they have littered many waters. We have drowned in them before. But when my baby speaks, they will wake people. They will know that bondage is deeper than chain. Bondage is bought and sold in our grocery stores, and we wade through better days to buy them. Wrap the rope around our necks, plaster ourselves with the illusion on our cell phone screen, and keep our eyes just wide enough to let in propaganda points of not good enough for my baby. Will know that she can move mountains before the TV or the First Amendment ever tell her so. She will know that God resides in the belly of the beast. She will sound the sirens. Tell us about her skin could never show you the depths of her shore. How her hair could never hang you like that 1% can. See, our bodies have always modeled slaughter in this city, but we will know that to be casualty of war is to resist the urge to wake up when my baby speaks of her mother. She will speak of a woman triumphant in a battle she need never bear. So here I am finishing up this architecture internship, and I realized, okay, this is not what I want to do. This isn't what I thought this was. And as I started to learn more about what real estate development was, naturally, it was time to then start learning about redlining and start learning about the history of my North Omaha community and start learning more about these land use policies that were shaping what I thought at the time was stagnation along the corridor in which I lived. And as I was learning that, I started to become a bit of an activist, naturally so. And At the same time, I moved into business. And then my minor became community and regional planning, and I got a certificate in civic engagement, and I kept doing poetry, and now my poetry was getting political, and I'm doing the whole thing. That's where it started to go. And at the very same time, I was in my neighborhood. At the time, I was living in Lincoln, so I lived in the near South neighborhood. I was working at this organization called South of Downtown. But even then, I could start to identify the disconnect between what was going on in the organization and what was going on in the streets, like in the real space in my neighborhood where I was surrounded. So I started volunteering at F Street Community Center. Then I started having community conversations, started a traveling series to better understand why aren't we talking about these things that we're seeing all the time? And how come it's so hard to get folks together to do stuff? I was just asking so many questions. And eventually that culminated to my first TEDx talk, where I started to talk about collective economics. At the time, I was 19 going on 20. After I got done with that, needless to say, I did a lot of things. I graduated, and then it was time to go to school for real estate development to get a master's degree. Now, I'd always wanted to go to New York just because I was interested in going to New York. That was it. There was no special thing. And the day I got there, my roommate was evicted, and thus so was I. And so the day I got there, I didn't have any housing. And then later on, shortly thereafter, my financial aid fell through, and I was just out there. Oh, I tell you. My mama said, honey, come home. And my dad said, oh, you can figure it out. I want to tell you something about my father. The first book that he really gave me when I was really able to, read and comprehend information was Think and Grow Rich. That was the kind of father I had. He was teaching me self-help principles at a very young age. And so even in that environment, when I knew I had no idea what to do, immediately I'm like, well, I gotta figure out something. And so I cried, and then we started to figure some stuff out. Luckily, I had a job lined up when I got there, so I got to working, and I couldn't go to school, but that was okay. I started living out of Airbnbs, and oh, it was so sad. I couldn't understand what was going on. I said, why is this happening? I had this vision so clear in my mind this entire time. What is going on? Well, in the 6th month of being there, I walk into my 6th Airbnb in the Bronx, and somehow I felt very comfortable. It just felt a little different. And there was a woman who was working there who was about to be on her way back home. And I asked the property owner if I could have that role when she left. She said yes, and there you go. I got my housing stable enough to go ahead and start my degree. All right. And at that time, this was this poem I was thinking about called Resilience. I just wanted to give up so bad. I just wanted to give up on everything, because even the things that I had thought about collective economics, even the things I thought about real estate, all of it was just sort of like falling apart for me in the way that I believed in it. A young man asks me to write a poem about not giving up. I tell him this poem is written every time the sun rises and I am still alive enough to see it. I tell him this poem sounds like silence in response to the question, don't you give up yet? Looks like. I don't know where I am going, but I'll be damned if I lay down. Despite how low I am right now, a young man asks me to write a poem about not giving up. And I want to ask him how many times he has been left for dead by friends. Hope he make it. I guess this envy will find itself in the minds of those we think are closest to us. And the thoughts of them will leave us empty, even though they were the ones taking the most from the very beginning. To be honest, I'd rather feel nothing at all than feel like giving up. But he demands I keep him hopeful. And I just wonder if the individuals that birthed his miracle of a life have yet had nerve to tell him that what he chooses to manifest for himself is impossible. As if he shouldn't be equally as capable of creating something so magnificent wanted to tell him of how worried mothers will go from that's my baby, follow your dreams, to maybe you should think about taking that plan B. Funny how the creator of my life could become the contraceptive to my reality, but it was fair. I made plans like I'd never heard God's laughter before. I got the sense he didn't think it was that funny. How can-do the attitude was, and my ignorant self, and reminded of how small I was in comparison, I asked, okay, so which way do I go? I mean, if you be the soil and I be the seed, then what more do I need? I'm digging deep, but why you keep pouring this water on me? You drowning me. I can't breathe. I want to warn you all about cursing God in times of testing. Oftentimes, the biggest fight will be between the bodies our souls have been tasked to mind. That fact will make you guilty sometimes, but be the last bit of motivation you have left on others, which is to say, you will often find yourself in the crossfire of everyone else, apologizing, even when the neighbors are the ones doing the shooting, confusing old beliefs of elders for wisdom, like, if it's just too hard, it probably ain't God's willing. But ain't you ever had to decipher between the devil's deed and God's testing? See, I found myself at a crossroads that looked like you ain't ready for what you asked for. Turns out, I wasn't asking for the right thing. God said, follow the changes. I went forward, called myself miracle, said bloom, said seed, pulled meat out the mud, renamed myself acknowledgeable when they refused to say my name properly. See, not giving up looks like claiming right to your flesh even when you do not know who you are yet. Looks like, yes, your patience will wear thin with them. Keep going. Looks like, yes, they would declare war on your skin, on the shine in your eyes, on your time, on your mind. Keep going. I found my wings as I was flying and falling. Oftentimes, you will not know which one it is until you land, and even then, you're not done. You must run. But if you cannot run, then you walk. And if you cannot walk, then you crawl. And if you cannot crawl, then you roll. Well, I'm just about finished here. So this is my, I get my degree. I learn all of these things that start to deeply transition how I'm thinking about real estate development. I start thinking differently about the person that I was when I was advocating so hard at City Council in Lincoln about affordable housing and such. I start understanding why no was no. And that was rather terrifying. And then I go start working at Notto companies. It took me a while to get the role, but when I got it, I got in there and I said, I got to figure out how to be useful immediately. Okay, what are we going to do? What I decided to do was something that I understood that I could teach myself independently, which was financial analysis. So I started learning the numbers in that space. But what I was struggling with was how to take that back to my neighborhood and not have the detrimental effects that inherently sometimes come with new development, especially if you don't have certain policies in place to protect people. And that is where I'm at right now. Okay? At 27, I do not have the conclusion to this story. That is where I'm at. So I've been working at Notto companies for about 3.5 years now. And I have also been doing poetry just in my spare time. So to be state poet is absolutely crazy. Let me tell you about this, and then I'm going to get out of here. There is a woman, and there are many people who have spoken a vision for me that I did not see for myself. And I feel like that's one of the most important things that has affected the trajectory of my life. Because in many ways, I'm thinking too small. But I don't even know I'm thinking too small. I'm thinking something, And they're like, are you sure, honey? But I appreciate the people who speak up, because sometimes folks see you struggling and they just figure that's just what you want for yourself. Even if you don't, or you're trying, but you're doing the best you can, you need a little guidance. So this woman, she sees me doing poetry. She saw me all throughout UNL. She heard about me when I was in New York. I come back home. She hears about me some more. She's like, I think I'm going to nominate you for applying for being state poet. I said, what? You sure? She said, yeah. I'm like, okay, I guess. So she nominates me. The nomination is accepted, and they invite me to apply. And when you're invited to apply, many people apply, right? It's a very interesting process. So I actually don't know how many people applied, but I know that there were 4 finalists, and the finalists were like tenured professors and such. and then there's 27-year-old me. Okay, that's all I'm saying. So we get to the then we get to the finalist round, and we have our interviews and everything. And I think to myself, I'm not gonna get this. But hold up, I prepared. Okay, even though I'm like, oh, there's no way. So when the announcement was finally made, I thought to myself, oh, that's crazy. And then the press conference happened, and I'm sitting in the state capitol, and I'm like, oh, this is for real. They weren't joking. And so now, one thing I'm also in the middle of is trying to think through how that is affecting my life. It is quite a task to do all of the things all at one time. Not to mention I had all these side projects going on anyway. So now, I went from working from 5:30 to 6 because I always had a little side something I was trying to do before work, right? So I'm going to do my side stuff before work. I go to work, and then, I kind of got the evening. Well, now it's like 5:30 to like 11:30 most days. That's not sustainable. So now I have to think through my next move, but I know it has to honor this role. There is nothing in life at all that makes me feel the way this makes me feel. So, so I know to some degree I have to honor that. And at the very same time, I still feel very called to better understanding where I fit into the built environment in my neighborhood and how I can use this gift to communicate the things that I am learning. That's where I'm at. So like I said, and maybe in a couple decades, we can follow up. And if I had to leave with one takeaway, something that just stuck out to me as I was listening to Miss Vita was listen. Listening to the calling, listening to the inner voice, just listen. That's what I've been doing. And it gets harder each time after I get done with the last thing I listened to. I think, I listened. All right, it's coming now. And there's just more, and you got to keep trusting like every day, all of the time, big and small. That's been my takeaway. That's my takeaway for this evening. I wish you many blessings, and I wish you the capacity to listen.